He got used to smiling when everything inside him screamed, not out of vanity, not out of pride, but because he realized very early on that his pain bothered others. The truth is, he had always been good at disguising. He learned to hide the chaos, the confusion, the desire to disappear. Deep down, he carried much more than he let on. There were days when he spoke as if he was fine, but all it took was the silence of his room for everything to come crashing down again. He didn't cry out for help, because he had already noticed that when he tried, few really listened. People saw him as too strong to break, and when he did break, no one heard the noise. Have you ever felt this? Being among people and still feeling invisible? Comment. I needed to hear this if that phrase touched some part of you that no one sees, but he carried on, because stopping felt worse than pretending to keep going. His soul craved rest, but the world demanded performance. So he learned to be two, the one who feels and the one who shows. It's cruel, having to hide your truth just to avoid bothering anyone, but he did it so many times that he almost forgot who he was. He acted as if it didn't hurt, as if it were normal to be put off until later, as if he didn't care about the absences, the silences, the emotional delays. But inside him, everything was a muffled scream. He just wanted a look that noticed, without him having to explain, without needing to justify why he wasn't smiling all the time. He was tired of justifying himself, for being intense, for caring too much, for feeling too deeply, realizing how much this pushed people away, hurt more than loneliness itself. Because what really tears you apart inside isn't being alone. It's feeling misunderstood even when surrounded by others. He just wanted to be read, not with the eyes but with the heart, as if someone could perceive what he himself could no longer name. Do you know what hurts the most? It's that he never asked for too much. He just wanted a safe space to collapse, a hug where he wouldn't have to pull himself together quickly. He just wanted to be heard, without the other person rushing to console him, because sometimes consolation comes before listening, and that hurts too. He started to silence himself more, not by choice, but out of exhaustion. He didn't want to dramatize. He didn't want to seem fragile. He just wanted to exist with his pain without having to disguise it. But the world is impatient with those who feel too much, and because of that, he learned to respond, "I'm fine," even when everything inside was imploding. Most people never noticed the effort it took to maintain that facade. The armor he created seemed indestructible, but inside he was trembling. Have you ever seen someone like that? Someone who seems too strong, but carries cracks inside that no one notices. Maybe you're recalling someone now, or perhaps you're seeing yourself. He doesn't remember the last time someone asked, "But what about you? What are you really feeling?" People were used to seeing him standing tall, strengthened, available, but no one asked what it cost him to stay there. He was becoming the pillar for many, and the burden of himself. The truth, he was exhausted, but emotional exhaustion is invisible to those who only see smiles. He walked around smiling with his lips while dying in his eyes. Subtle, disguised, perceptible only to those who know where to look. Only no one looked. Most people just took advantage of his shoulder, of his listening ear, of his presence. And when he started to withdraw and to retreat, to say, "I can't today," silence was the only response. No one noticed the cry for help disguised in each refusal. No one bothered to ask, "Are you still in there?" The truth is, he slowly distanced himself, hoping someone would come after him, but no one came. And it was in that silent abandonment that he realized his presence was convenient but never essential for others. This shattered him. He started to rethink everything, the conversations he maintained, the bonds that only existed when he pulled them. How many times had he been the only one holding up connections that seemed mutual? How many times had he sacrificed himself for ties that only worked in one direction? He realized that affection, when it needs to be earned, becomes a burden, and he was tired of bearing that weight. He wanted lightness, but the only thing he knew how to do was hold on. Hold on to his composure. Hold on to his relationships. Hold on to the world spinning, even when his was standing still. He had become an expert at holding on, but he could no longer continue living as if it didn't hurt, as if the absence of others was just a detail, as if he didn't notice when he was ignored, discarded, belittled. The truth is, he always noticed, he always perceived, but he pretended not to, because it was easier to swallow the pain than to face the embarrassment of showing it. But something changed. Inside him, the scream became too loud to keep pretending. That's when he started to allow himself to lose control, lose the image of being strong, lose the need to please. He finally understood that he didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to be the best, not to be the most available, not to be the most stable. He just wanted peace. A peace that didn't require a mask, a peace that accepted him whole, including the parts that others always wanted to ignore. The world said he was too much, too deep, too emotional, too intense. But it was precisely that intensity that had supported many for so long. Now he needed to be supported, not out of pity, not from emotional charity, but out of reciprocity. And that was the hardest realization to accept, that not everyone is willing to love back. Some only know how to receive, and he was tired of being the harbor for others when no one was a dock for him. This realization came like a cut. The pain wasn't just in the loneliness, but in how much he gave without ever being truly seen. Have you ever felt like you gave too much to someone who was never enough for you? If this phrase brought someone to your mind, leave a comment here. Sometimes naming the pain is already a step towards freedom, but it wasn't easy for him to get to this point. There were nights when he thought about disappearing, not from a lack of love for life, but from not knowing how to live it that way anymore. No one noticed when he stopped replying to messages. No one realized when he went quiet on social media. No one wondered where he was when he disappeared from his usual hangouts. And it was in that emptiness that he learned to see himself. Without filters, without an audience, without anyone. It was there in absolute silence that he began to listen to himself. And that's when something new was born. A type of awareness that doesn't come from the world, but from the spirit. He started to perceive himself like never before, not as a victim, not as a savior, but as someone who exists beyond the roles he plays. He realized he was so much more than the utility he provided to others, much more than the love he gave. He was an entire universe, packed into an exhausted body, and he deserved to be embraced. Not for what he does, but for who he is. From that point on, he began to observe the world with new eyes. He saw what no one else said. He picked up on nuances, absences, unspoken presences. Because those who have hurt too much start to perceive everything in depth, including what others try to hide. And that's why he could never go back to being the same. The truth is that once awakened, it's impossible to fall back asleep. And he awoke. To himself, to the truth, to what he deserves. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But it was necessary, and he has no regrets. He realized he was tired of losing himself in others, of bending, molding, disappearing, just to fit into places that were never meant for him, because he always felt too much, thought too much, waited too much. But he learned too late that not everyone is made of depth. Some just skim the surface and are frightened by those who come from the depths. He had tried to fit in. He tried to be lighter, shallower, easier to love, but every time he hid parts of himself, he died a little. Being accepted for who you're not is a slow sentence, and he lived like that for years, with a kind of emptiness that can't be explained, that can't be filled, because it has nothing to do with what's missing outside, but with what he needed to silence inside. But there came a point when his body began to scream, anxiety, insomnia, shortness of breath, crying for no apparent reason. It was his body saying, "You can't betray yourself anymore." And he understood. Stopping the self-betrayal meant losing a lot, but it also meant finally finding himself. And that's why he chose to distance himself, even if it meant loneliness. Even if it scared those who had grown accustomed to his complacent version. He didn't want to please anymore. He wanted to listen to himself. It was hard at first, because silence, when you're used to living for others, seems unbearable. But he stayed, even with fear, even not knowing how it would be afterward. And there, in the center of the void, he began to hear a voice that had never had space to emerge, his own. It was a timid voice, tired, full of scars, but it was true. He recognized himself in it, not as someone broken, but as someone who finally started to build from the very rubble of his existence. And this reconstruction was slow, delicate, painful. He had to let go of characters, of patterns, of expectations. He had to unlearn how to defend himself with coldness and relearn how to protect himself with presence, because he understood. It's not about stopping feeling. It's about not abandoning yourself for anyone anymore. That's when his perspective changed. He began to better recognize who deserved to be there, who truly saw him for who he really was, not as a crutch, not as support, but as a human being. And through that filter, many people fell away. But he didn't mourn, because now he knew any relationship that requires him to hide his pain to be loved is not love. He didn't want that anymore. He wanted to be in a place where he could cry without fear, where he could be silent without guilt, where he could be too much and still be chosen. That wasn't asking for too much. It was asking for the bare minimum. But the world learned to romanticize shallow relationships. And he knew real intimacy is intimidating, but it also heals. That's why he chose to be whole, even if it made him feel more alone. Because he understood the loneliness of being with someone who doesn't understand him hurts more than being alone with himself. Have you ever felt this way? Surrounded, yet alone. Does this resonate with you? Write yes in the comments if this touched a part of you that no one sees. But he didn't stop there. Solitude became his home. And curiously, a new kind of strength was born there. A strength that doesn't shout, doesn't impose itself, doesn't need to prove anything. It's the strength of someone who has recognized themselves, who has embraced themselves, who has chosen themselves. He began to walk differently, calmer, more present. He started to speak less and listen more to his own soul. He began to realize that in every encounter, there was a mirror, and that the world treated him the same way he treated himself. That's when he stopped pleading, stopped chasing after, stopped trying to convince. Those who don't see his value don't deserve his time. And that's not arrogance, it's self-awareness. He had spent too long giving himself to those who never saw him completely. Now he wanted more depth, more truth, more presence. Less games, less empty promises, fewer relationships that start intense and end cold. He had lived that cycle too many times. He had met people who said, "You are everything," and then disappeared. Now he didn't want words. He wanted consistency, coherence. He knew those who truly see stay, even when he isn't doing well, even when he needs space, even when he isn't smiling. Because it's easy to love when everything is light. The hard part is loving when the other person is in pieces, and he has been in pieces so many times. But now he has started to withdraw before breaking, to listen to himself before exploding, to take care of himself before bleeding. That was the greatest act of self-love in his life, and no one taught him this. He learned it on his own, in pain, in absence, in disappointment. And even so, he didn't turn to stone. He became a root. Now he no longer wants fleeting flowers. He wants someone who can withstand the seasons, someone who stays in the cold, someone who waters during the dry spells, someone who sees themselves with him, and not just through him. He doesn't want applause anymore. He wants presence. And if that's rare, he's willing to wait, because he's tired of trading depth for crumbs, intensity for convenience, truth for adaptation. He doesn't want to be accepted anymore. He wants to be loved. And loving someone like him takes courage, because he goes all the way, he dives in, he feels everything. But whoever has the courage to stay will experience a type of love that heals, because he loves with everything, with presence, with listening, with depth. And he only wants to live something that carries the same weight of truth, nothing less than that. He no longer settled for halves, nor for lukewarm relationships, nor for promises made in the heat of the moment and forgotten in the cold of routine. He wanted something whole, and that's why he began to distance himself from what was shallow. In the beginning, it hurt. The absence felt unbearable. But over time, he realized that the pain of being alone was more honest than the pain of shrinking to fit. And it was in that space that he began to rebuild himself, little step by little step, without rushing back to being who he was, because deep down he knew. He didn't want to be who he was before. He wanted to be new. He wanted to be born again. This time, without having to betray himself. Have you noticed that sometimes life forces an end just to make way for a new beginning? That's what he understood. The pain that almost destroyed him, it was the same pain that set him free. And from that moment on, every choice carried a different weight. He no longer said yes out of fear of losing. He only said it when he truly wanted to stay. And he began to feel something different, lightness, not because the world became easier, but because he stopped carrying what wasn't his to bear. Now every glance, every presence, every word, he filtered through a different lens, the lens of someone who no longer deceives themselves, someone who has learned to see beyond the obvious. And that's how he started to attract something new, because when you change inside, the world around you changes too. Do you feel it too, that life starts to align when you decide to stop betraying yourself? If so, write down below, "I choose the truth." If this resonated with you, don't stop here. The next video will open your eyes even wider and take you to a place you might not even know exists within you. Click now and continue with me, because this conversation has only just begun.